Hello, everyone. I'm Raj Changadoo. This is Property Investing 2.0, and my guest today is Steve Rice. Steve has been investing in property for about 15 years now. He has an extensive background in the construction industry, from troubleshooting on sites to investment and development. He has headed up hundreds of millions of pounds in commercial projects and tens of millions in residential. We are very lucky to have him here with us today. Steve, hello and welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi Raj, how are you? Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. Very well. Yeah.
Good. Steve, this is probably about take 22, isn't it? To be honest, we a few weeks ago we tried to get this set up. Unfortunately, the internet gods were not on our side, and we've had a little bit of troubles this morning. However, it's all going to be worth it. I'm determined to get this all sorted because I know this episode is going to bring some great value for people when we're talking about the things that you really wish you knew when you were first starting in property, the things you wish someone had told you when you were getting into this game. And we want our listeners to learn vicariously through you, through your lessons, through your mistakes. You're the guinea pig on this one, Steve. So I think the best thing to do, as always, if we can start from the beginning, tell us a little bit about how you got into property.
Sure. Yeah. So it sounds quite impressive when someone else is reading all these things out, isn't it? I thought, who is this person? My first encounter with property was by construction. My uncle owned a small building contractor in London. When I was 16, I worked there during the school holidays. Some lovely projects up in Chelsea. And it really lit my curiosity. I thought, oh, this is something quite interesting. This is something very different. I was quite academic when I was younger, but as I grew a bit older, it really was more about I wanted to be out there doing it rather than sitting in classrooms, listening, learning about things which may or may not be of use to me later in life. So, seeing the business really transforming a property from how it was to almost being brand new, newly refurbished property, I was fascinated in it. So then that really lit the spark of interest in property and construction. I then went on to leave school at 18, made construction my career. I started off as a quantity surveyor. For those who don't know, a quantity surveyor is it's a jack of all trades on the commercial side. Really, there's a lot of legal involved, procurement. It's about making money. There's a lot of contract involved as well. So it's about buying and selling packages to win a contract from a client, then to tender it out, procure it, and ensure that the company's interests, commercial interests, are looked after, liaising with the subcontractors, etc. So it's a great way into the building industry. I ended up, I'm still actually involved in construction on the consultancy side. But do some troubleshooting, some consultancy, and some non-exec stuff. So it's a great background for moving into property. So I maintained my interest in property through about 15 years until I actively started investing in property. Now, unfortunately, at the time, there weren't podcasts such as this. There weren't the resources that we have. The internet wasn't so widely available. There weren't the education providers that we have now, networking. It just didn't exist. So I had to go out there and make some very expensive mistakes for myself. And in fact, I've got a whole talk about it. Some people may have heard me at various events. Just talking it through. I've got nothing to sell. I don't sell courses or anything like that. I just give people the benefit of my learning, and hopefully they can. They can gain those lessons in a much cheaper way than I did. And we can go into some of those mistakes as we talk through this afternoon. But first property invested in 2005. Carried on with my career in construction until 2015. So for 10 years, that ran hand in hand through the credit crunch, what have you, some very interesting times. And I left full-time employment in 2015. And for the past 5 years, property has been my main focus. But at the same time, I haven't dropped everything for property. I think it's important, and that's something which we're going to talk about later on, is it's important to diversify what you have. I mean, the the term multiple streams of income is well known there in property investment circle. I think it's incredibly important.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll certainly going to be diving into a lot of those avenues later on. And yeah, you seem like you've always been from an early age been involved in the construction industry in one way or another. And I know you mentioned before about one of your early investments was buying overseas, and I wonder why you took that approach, and maybe you can take us
Sure.
through
Okay. Well,
that a little bit.
I'll talk you through the journey, really. So it was around.
I actively started looking in the early 2000s in terms of property investment. I'd had colleagues previously at work who, in the mid 90s, I was a young guy in my 20s. I was too busy going out living the life of a bachelor to be interested in property investment. That's started looking in the early 2000s, and I came across a company called Inside Track, selling off plan. Some of the older, some of the investors nearer to my age may have heard of them. Inside Track did not end well. They were allegedly selling below market value properties in the time of basically a property boom in the early 2000s. I bought a property in Manchester. Had never seen it. Didn't know anything about it. Made my first mistake in, I've listed down a number of sort of like top 10 or top 20 tips in, no particular order. But one of them is, agents are there to sell property. They don't act for the buyer. They're trying to sell you something. Whatever they say, don't believe it. Do not believe it unless you see clear evidence. We've all come across them. There are good agents and bad agents, good property developers, bad property developers. But I believed the spin by Inside Track. They were basically given a script to sell. Bought it in Manchester without seeing it. And trying to manage a property at arm's length. I was living in London at the time, 4 hours journey from Manchester. It's just a nightmare. You haven't got the support network that you need in order to run a property. So Manchester wasn't far away enough for me. So having bought that one off plan, I started going by in Ireland, the Republic of Ireland. So my family are Irish. There were reasons for that. I bought in an absolutely beautiful part of the world. Anyone who wants to Google it, Murrisk, Murrisk. The back window, you're looking out over the sea. At the front window, you literally have a mountain in front of you. It is absolutely idyllic. But the property market, I was fortunate that I bought it just before the Celtic Tiger property market really got going. But again, trying to manage a property at arm's length in a different country, it's an absolute nightmare. It's a different legal system. The supply chain wasn't there. I didn't have solicitors, accountants I could trust. I just went ahead and did it. So some people, that's in their nature. You can sit down, you can tell them as much as they want, and they'll nod, go, yeah, and go ahead and do it anyway and learn for themselves. I didn't have anyone giving me advice at the time, so I've only got myself to blame. I'm not even going to blame the agents who sweet talked me into it, but I was an adult. I made my decisions. They were the wrong decisions. I sold the Manchester property last year for a very small profit after 14 years, I think it was. You take out 14 years property growth in the market and see what that should have been. And then Ireland, I bought at the right price. But the property market in rural Ireland is dead now. So it's rented out. It's doing okay. I now have a cousin who has been a lifesaver on that one. He's come into the investment with me and looks after it and what have you. So Richard has been fantastic on that. And he has his own property portfolio that he deals with as well out there. So don't trust agents. Don't buy overseas. Unless you have a real proven, trustworthy network. Please, people, don't do it. It doesn't work. Now, everyone's going to say, well, I did it and it worked for me. Well, that's like everyone's got the 90-year-old uncle who still smokes 20 Woodbines a day and drinks a bottle of whiskey. I wouldn't recommend it as a lifestyle. And I wouldn't recommend buying overseas as an investment strategy. So that's my first two mistakes I made.
So on that, I think they're great. They're great mistakes to learn from, but let's dive into them a little bit more in terms of what people do to mitigate the challenges that would have cropped up in that situation. Because there are people who still buy out of area. You know, like you said, the Manchester one, it's still out of area. And one of the things that seems to crop up in this conversation is the fact that you need to have good relationships with the professionals on the ground who are looking after it. If you don't have that, managing it from an arm's length is going to be an absolute nightmare.
I think even before that, Raj, you really need to have a strategy. So I was, buying one here, buying one there. There was no strategy behind it. It was just, oh, they told me it's cheap. They told me what the returns are. I'm going to buy it in Manchester. Ireland, it was a good price, beautiful location. I'm buying it for the wrong reasons. There's no strategy behind the reasoning for me purchasing it other than I want to be a property investor. And I meet this time after time after time after time with newcomers. They see it, say, oh, I love it. I love the property. I said, you're never going to spend a night in there. How does it fit in with everything else you're doing? So it really needs to come back to the strategy first. Now, you absolutely can make running an arm's length portfolio as your strategy. However, you've got to look at the pros and the cons. So in any investment, and be honest with yourself as well. What are the advantages of doing it? Why are you buying at arm's length? Why are you buying out there? If it's because it's cheap, well, cheap doesn't necessarily equal good value. You're getting £500 rent a month. You get one boiler goes, that's probably a year, 2 years rent profit out the window, isn't it? So on the cheaper end of property. So, I say to someone buying their first property, what would you like to see? Where would you like to see yourself in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, and how does this purchase fit in with that? I mean, there's more of a checklist to go through with each of your purchases. Just going back to the strategy itself in the first place is to, what is it you want to be about? Do you want to run a portfolio in Manchester of flats? If you do, then fine, go ahead, find these professionals who can run it for you, and work with it that way. But buying one here, without any joined up thinking is a surefire way to quickly fall out of love with property. Lesson number one, I know you're dying to get in there, but I forgot lesson number one, which I always say to people: property is a great way to get rich slow. Please don't be looking for overnight successes and riches. I think that's what the National Lottery is for. Let's be realistic about things. Excuse me. If you're starting with, a 5-figure pot today, you're not going to be living off it for the rest of your life. Within 6 months' time, it's not going to be a hands-free income. So people need to be realistic about it, about the time frames involved, about money in and money out. Everything will take twice as long, as twice expensive as you think it'll be. And I'm still living those lessons now, So it's be realistic with things. This isn't a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's not a winning lottery ticket or a scratch card. It's a business, and you need to treat it like that. And there's no business where someone wouldn't start up a business today and say, right, I'm going to be selling doors today, and then Tuesday I'm going to be selling ice creams. On Wednesday I think I'll be a pizza parlour, and I think I'll be a mechanic on Thursday, which is how I started off with my property business. There was no joined up thinking on it. So that's a long answer to a simple question, but hopefully it pads it out a bit more and is of some value to anyone thinking, considering, or taking their first steps in property investing.
No, I completely agree with all of that, Steve. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of people get into this game thinking it's going to be get rich quick. This is not that industry. At the end of the day, you have to enjoy the journey and enjoy the process. And I know that sounds cliche, but it is a long journey. You have to keep home in your craft, and people, you can get rich, as you said. It's not always easy, but it is worth it if you enjoy getting into property. And I don't think enough people, myself included at times, when I first got into it, give it enough thought. You were talking about why we get into property, why it's important to have a certain strategy. And that shiny penny syndrome is a big thing. People look at what other people are doing and they think, oh, I want to do that because they seem to be getting good returns. I'll do that instead of focusing on their own journey and what they really want from property. I mean, if you just want an extra £1,000 a month to go on a few nicer holidays with your family, then you have no business doing a certain strategy. You have no business doing that big, huge development that's going to give you 6 figures at the end of it, because it's not even meeting your goals in the first place. I mean, did you ever struggle with that shiny penny syndrome at all?
Absolutely, yeah. The fear of missing out, absolutely, that was a consideration. And again, people will be listening to this, and I'm certain if they listen to it again in 5 years' time, they'll turn around and say, "Do you know what? Those two guys have done it. They've felt the pain. They sat there. They went to the trouble of telling me all about it, and I still went and did it. And do you know what? They were right. Fancy that." So yeah, absolutely. There are so many. Whenever I've stood on stage and addressed dozens, hundreds of people in a room, I've always said that none of us are in competition with each other because there are so many different property strategies out there. I mean, you and I, Raj, we live within 100 yards of each other. We're not in competition with each other. It's there are so many different strategies, be it geographic, be it the value of the properties, the type of properties, who your tenants are. Do you go to end users? Do you build and sell? Do you build to rent? Do you renovate? There are so many different strategies that it can be difficult finding the one that suits you best. And there's no harm in testing out things, but what I would suggest is get the first one right before you start going on and to other things. I've honed down to probably a couple of main strategies now. And touching your point earlier about, you see people online in terms of what they're doing. They seem to be doing well. I can guarantee that's not the first thing they've gone and picked up and had a try at. If they are genuinely being successful at it, I'm sure there's a story behind it, a journey behind it. And also, maybe a little bit of cynic, the realist in me, when I see people online saying what they're saying, is why are they saying it? What's behind it? Is it philanthropy? Are they selling something? Are they creating their brand and selling something in the brand? Is there a course behind it? Is there, look what I've done, you can do it too for 99p a week, no down payment, whatever it may be. So listen, let's just have a bit of realism. Again, we've all seen people online talking about their wonderful lives, and you think, I know that person. I wouldn't swap my life for all the tea in China. So please don't get caught up in the hype as to what people are making or not making money at.
No, and that's it. And people new to property, they might. Your emotions get the best of you, don't you? Because you just want to be in the game. It is absolutely exciting, but it can also have a negative effect, like you said, because of the online world these days, because of things like Instagram and Facebook and seeing what other people are doing. Just because you didn't buy 10 properties in a year doesn't make you a failure at what you're doing. You shouldn't get down about it. I mean, and that's why my thought process has changed over time. At first, I thought, well, I have to buy as many properties as I can. I have to do bigger and better developments. And then I thought, well, if you really enjoyed this game, even if you end up buying 1, 2, 3, if you really enjoy property, that's enough. That's enough to keep you doing it at the end of the day. In my mind, that's why you have to enjoy the process, I believe, because there has to be a minimum that live on the ends. There's a minimum that's still acceptable, and there's the high end as well. And if you can be anywhere in between, you're still going to be happy on your journey doing what you want to be doing. And back to the shiny penny syndrome, I think it goes back to knowing when you're in a dip and knowing when you're in a dead end, right? Because some people, I think that's Seth Godin who did that book, The Dip. And, people get to the hard bit of the strategy and then they think, oh, this is too difficult, I'm going to do something else now. They see another one, they go on to that, get to the difficult bit again, the valley of despair. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're in a dead end, or it doesn't mean necessarily that the strategy isn't for you. So going back to what you said about getting things right at the start, is there some tips that you have for people to discover what's best for them, have awareness of what they really want to do? Where do they start with that?
Yeah, it's I think we are, I would count us as entrepreneurs, yourself, myself, Raj. So I think as entrepreneurs, our single greatest asset is ourselves. I mean, we are our number one asset. I mean, we've obviously got the bank balance sat there and we have time on our hands and what have you, but we ourselves, and we've got to know ourselves best as to what we do. Now, I have looked into and actively pursued a number of property investment models over the past 15 years, which were not best suited to how I work. I like to be removed from the game. I don't like to be in the nitty gritty, nuts and bolts, day to day management doing. So therefore, running certain types of investment are just not for me. So sit down, have a think about what you enjoy doing in terms of work, because it is work. And people say, oh, it's not work to me. And that's brilliant. And you know what? I really enjoy it. I really enjoy property. It's given me a lot and my family a lot. We've worked hard for it. But at the end of the day, it's a business and it's there to make you money. If you're going looking for thrills and excitement and ego, which I would suggest quite a few people do initially get into property because of these things, to show off, to say, look at me, then if you're going into it for the ego trip, then your bank balance is going to suffer for it. So I think you need to question your motives and treat it like any other job. Pretend you actually have a boss who is overlooking you. If you write down your commitments, almost pretend that, right, this is my commitment to my boss that I'm making today. Because if you don't take it seriously, if you treat it like a throwaway hobby, then the results will reflect that. And if you're looking for an easy life, please believe me, property is not one for an easy life. Again, we've all been there. I've been online myself, sat in Monaco and Cayman and Vegas and what have you, and I might have had a hell of a meeting, for 2 days before that. I might be at these places missing my family. It's just bring a bit of realism to it. Now, please don't think I'm not trying to be the Grinch because it's the Christmas episode here, but it's just a bit of realism, really. I just like to be realistic with people and say, look, this is how it is. You are in competition with people. You will come across as many problems as you had at work, you'll have in property, if not more. I've lying awake at night worrying about things, as we all do, in property, just the same as I did when I had a day job. So please don't think it's going to take any of those away. However, there are obviously a lot of pros, in terms of working in property. Undoubtedly gives you freedom. Undoubtedly gives you, once you get into it and your business matures, it gives you the opportunity to pursue other things, meet great people, make a living for yourself and your family, create a legacy. Obviously create something you can hand on to your family if that's what they'd like to do. One of the best things, I heard Mark Stokes on one of your podcasts recently, and he put it in a bit more industrial language than me, but I like working with people that I like. I don't have to work with people I don't like. We'll all obviously, occasionally get the odd person who rubs us up the wrong way, but that's life. This isn't Disneyland. It's business and it's difficult and it's competitive. But if you put the work in, you're sensible about it, you take your time, realistic, get to know yourself, it can give you a wonderful life.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And like you said, even though we were shining some light on some realities, I think there's, if it was that bad, we wouldn't be doing it ourselves, and that's it. You've got a bit of hard work. You've got a lot of hard work at the start, but then you can start shaping the life that you want. If you want to do a podcast in the middle of the day, hey, you can do that. Your boss is not going to tell you to not do it. If you want to go for a walk or a coffee, whenever you want to do it, then you can take the time off. But at the end of the day, you're responsible for your own future. If you don't put in the work and you keep taking that time off and you go to Vegas, Steve, go. And you are, you've got to make sure you put in the work as well. And going back to what you said about writing down what you really want, re-engineering it, I think is an absolute truth there, is start with the end in mind. Where do you really want to be at the end of your life? Not in 5 years, those 3-5 year goals. Where do you want to be at the very end? And re-engineer back from that. That's how I think I help stay on track for me. But I think that rolls in nicely for the 70-20-10 rule that you mentioned before. And I think that is a great way for people to focus on a select few strategies and not lose too much momentum. So perhaps you can share what that rule is for people.
Sure, yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to bring in the Pareto principle, the 80-20 as well. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yep. But share that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pareto 80-20.
What that rule says is that basically 80% of your results, however you want to measure those results in. So let's just put it in pound notes, yeah? 80% of your results will come from 20% of your input. Okay, it's input and output. It's how efficient you are. So basically what that means is 20% of your results, so 20% of everything you achieve, it will take 80% of your time to achieve that. Now, I'm not saying that's directly you're working 4 times as long on that to achieve a quarter of the result. It bundles up everything. So let's, for example, take it for if you have a 9-to-5 job, Monday to Friday, yeah? If you were to do a time motion study on people as to what they're doing, they're getting up, they're making a coffee, they're having a chat, they're, checking their phone, they're standing by the photocopier, all of those sort of non-productive things get rolled up into the 80. Now, we can't throw all those out because some of them are just, your social niceties, get to know people, they underpin the 20. But what it is important is to focus on that 20%, yeah? So to focus on that 20%, so you know that that's going to make the money. And also for the 80%, try and eliminate as much of that waste as you can, because then you'll make yourself more efficient. And then what you'll find is you're able to do more in the same amount of time. Now, please don't think I'm chained to my desk from 8 in the morning till 10 at night. I'm not. I found out how I work best. And I work best in real concentrated blocks of time. And then I give myself the other time to go out and do viewings and to have coffees with people and to do podcasts and all that sort of thing. So it's really important to make sure you diarise that quality time. That 20% is going to give you 80% of all your outputs. It's really important to keep that and to protect it and to keep that as yours. Nothing can come in that. So basically for me, mornings for me are by far the most productive time of the day. What I will tend to do is my diary will tend to be filled up in the mornings and freer in the afternoons, just because I know how I work best. So 80-20, Pareto principle, very important. Look into it. It's fantastic. It changed my life. I probably read it about 20 years ago, and it absolutely changed my life. And it enabled me to go from a full-time career to a full-time career and property on the side to property. That absolutely underpinned the whole thing. So really important. Now, 70-20-10 is about how you allocate that time. Okay? So 70 being 70% of your time should be on your main strategy. Starting off, it's going to be your main breadwinner. What makes the money? So for me, 2004, let's take that as a starting point. 2004, so 70% was my full-time job. It was my job. 20% would have been property, and 10% would be all the other bits and pieces that I was looking at, be it online trading and shares, investments, and whatever else it might be, education and bits and pieces like that. So 70-20-10. You have your main strategy that's making you money, yeah, which will then help to feed the 20 and the 10. That's how I looked at it. Okay, so basically I concentrate on the 70. My job is what created the pot of wealth for me then to invest in property, and 10% was really what I was looking at, because I started off in development, in flipping properties. So, and then the 10% was looking at other property strategies and other bits and pieces, and like my pension and shares and stocks and whatever else. So the 70 created the wealth, and that paid the bills and created the wealth to do the 20. Now, that doesn't mean that 70 has to stay the same, because obviously in 2015, July 2015, lost my 70. So my 20 became my 70, my 10 became into my 20, and then something else became my 10. And then once I have that up and running, then I can set my 70 aside. That won't go because I'll still retain the businesses, but maybe that 70 becomes my 10 now because I've got everything up and running now. I know how it's doing. I've got some great agents there. I've got a PA. I've got a bookkeeper. I've got business partners. They'll run it. It might be a once a month meeting. Now, I've had times in the past where the greater part of our portfolio, it was maybe taking me half an hour a month, maybe tops. And that was a decent sized portfolio, creating thousands of pounds worth of profit every month, thousands, you know, 5 figures a month. So, you know, that has become my 10, and now other things now come in and become my 70. So really what it is look, if you are going to look at these shiny pennies, by all means, look at them, have a think about them, because we all have to do our due diligence, or whatever we decide it will be, we have to do our due diligence on it in the first place. So, you know, carry on looking at it, but don't be spending, you know, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours looking at, you know, commercial or lease options, or, you know, whatever it might be, build to rent, or whatever you chose. Please don't give them all equal weighting, because that's a quick, surefire way of paralysis by analysis, getting absolutely nowhere. You know, looking at absolutely everything, and you just get overwhelmed. You know, I would get overwhelmed. I'm there thinking there's 20, 100, 50, you know, thousands of, we said it earlier, thousands of different strategies. And if you try and do them all, you'll never get anywhere. You quite literally won't. It's like saying, right, I want to go and do some sport. Well, you can't play 500 different sports to the same degree, can you? You got to concentrate on one, find out what works for you. You know, well, sure, go along for taster lesson here, there, and everywhere. But please don't try and do everything with the same amount of input. You will just get it's a quick way to spend all your money and to lose heart as well, and to lose your motivation to get there.
Steve, I think that 70-20-10 rule is a great strategy for people in terms of organising their day, organising their life, really, for whatever you do. Like you said, if your 70 is your breadwinner, and that could be your job, as you said, or if it is your first main strategy, let's just say it's rent to rent, for example. And then can you get to a point, like you said, where you can automate and systemize as much as you can within that process, so you can spend more time on the next one? But only do that once it's set up and running. I think people try and move on too quickly, and that's where that shiny penny syndrome comes in again. Another one is I've thought is do they complement each other as well? Sometimes it's an easier, instead of starting something completely new, because some people are good at that. If you can automate the other one really well, you can start something a bit different, a different strategy altogether. But if you don't have the time to do that, can it complement it? For example, if you're doing rent to rent on HMOs, can the next one be acquiring HMOs and running your own? And that can still be a 20. You don't do as many of those as you do on the rent to rents, but it can still be a 20%. And they complement each other from that perspective. The other thing I was going to go back to, because you gave so much content and so many things running through my mind there, is that when you were talking about the 80-20 rule and talking about working out in your day, where you spend your time, what you're doing, I think people should absolutely monitor that. If they monitor that for a month, just have a spreadsheet and just say, right, Monday I did this, I did that, and just highlight in green or something what was productive, what actually made a difference, what is either income generating or what is building relationships or learning, what is actually positive, not just, oh yeah, I had an hour meeting there, but probably only about 15 minutes of it was worth it, you know. So
pain of my life.
I hate it. Oh my God. What we're going to talk about, start, finish, right? If you want to have a chat, that's fine, but meetings, the amount of time, my life I'm wasting in meetings, pretty much, you know, when I had a full-time job. But yeah, if I can capture it in a text, it'll be in a text, not a meeting, believe me.
But no, going back to the 70-20-10, that is a great way for people to really organize the strategies that they're focusing on. And I want to move on from there, Steve, because I want to go a slightly different direction now. And I know you've done so much in the development and construction space. I know you said you started off in flips and things like that as well. But you've mentioned to me in the past that you see yourself more as an investor rather than a developer. And I wanted to know why that's the case for you.
Sure. Okay. So it's a pretty straightforward one. I think the market and the tax regime have moved. So it's actually a lot more difficult now to make money out of acquiring sites, gaining planning or gaining sites with planning, building out and selling it on. It's just a bottom line thing, really. You know, when we started off, Stamp duty was obviously different. Tax rules in terms of renting out in your personal name were different. The competition was much different 15 years ago. I mean, we had programs like Sarah Beanie on TV. Homes on the Hammer was probably just starting. That feels like it's been around for the whole of my life, since 1971. But now that, things like that were just starting, so people just getting a taste of it. Really, it was the more professional side, and I'll be honest, I think it was probably easier to make money in property 15 years ago. Now, and the issue from that also is, you used to go in, an awful lot of input, you turn it around. I was working in West London at the time, so there were nice big price tickets on that, and it was making good money. But the effort now to go along and identify plots, acquire the plots, gain the planning, get the finance, do the building or refurbishments. And then for me, that was only half it. Then you had to sell it as well. It's and you got to constantly reinvent it. Whereas for me, on build or develop to rent, you still have to go through and acquire it. But what you don't have to do is to build in that profit level whereby it's enough to make it worth your while. So especially in this era of very low interest rates, in terms of, rental levels are still pretty robust. So it just makes a lot more sense, bottom line, for the areas in which we operate in, is to acquire properties and keep them through a number of different vehicles. We still do sometimes acquire plots and flip them with planning. And that's because the market has become more mature now, and the price you can gain for a plot with planning, it used to be a third that people talk about. Yeah, a third to purchase it, a third to build it, and a third profit. Well, good luck with that one. No, it still does exist. But in terms of pure flipping, I think those opportunities are few and far between. And especially once, if you create a living out of it, and especially if you build a company and you have employees, you've got a hungry machine there. You've got to feed it, and you've got to go chase new things. And a lot of other people are chasing them as well. So for me, in the areas I operate, and listen, I do know there are areas of the country where it works very well. I had some involvement with them. I was involved with some very large schemes, hundreds of units, up in the north of the country. It just wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me, really. Number one factor, if those were on my doorstep, I absolutely would be investing in them. But they're not, and they mean staying away from home and, getting my age now, and the kids are getting older, and purely for me as to where I am. And it goes back to, not having a boss telling you will be going up and doing this project and what have you. It works best for me, and the profile and the risk profile of the investors that I work with, they're in it for the long term as well. So, I met a pretty successful guy just before lockdown in March, and I was chatting to him. I just mentioned property. He said, "Oh, I lost, it was 6 figures this year and 6 figures the previous year." And I said, "How did you manage to do that?" And it was with flips, trying to flip, buying it and having to sell it, because they got themselves into that with the bridging finance and what have you. They had to sell it. They couldn't afford to. They hadn't done their figures initially in terms of exit strategies and what have you. There was one exit strategy, and that was sell. And that's another huge thing that really appears very high in my top 10 for newcomers, is to have multiple exit strategies. If you buy this property and you can't sell it, what are you going to do? Because I met so many people sat there sweating, offering properties and plots at pretty robust prices because they could not afford to sell them. Otherwise, they'd got themselves into a corner. And they were all happy, it was all over Facebook and whatever else, and Instagram when they were buying it, and the keys on the table, and hey, we didn't see the pain that was going on in the background saying, please, can you find me a buyer for this? I said, no, sorry, it's too expensive.
That's it, isn't it? I completely agree. Another big lesson for people listening to this is, and I've talked about it before, but you can never talk about it enough, and that is multiple exits. I think that's absolutely imperative for people to really think about different ways. And an exit could be just, okay, you want to rent it out, but does it have more than one type of tenant? Does if it just rents to one person because you're in that rural area? Ireland's an example. It could be anywhere. It could be anywhere you are, but if they have one industry in that town, you're going to struggle to rent it to more than one type of person. And Steve, that brings me on to actually a routine and behavior question now, and it's about when you're halfway through a project, because there are those times where, and I'm sure you know it, no matter how many projects you do, something new comes up. A new challenge comes up every now and then that you haven't encountered before. And when you're halfway through, it's when you're the furthest away from the finish line, and it's when you're in the deepest amount of debt and money in there. And I wondered if during those challenging times, you've developed over time any routines and behaviors that help you persevere and deal with those moments.
Okay, so the first one is to obviously, through the exit strategy and through your due diligence, you mitigate that risk in the first place. Now, having said that, I'm actually just coming to the end of a little development near the both of us in Southbourne BH6, a property we purchased, and it looked absolutely fine. We had a survey done. It was only a buyer survey because we were doing a full refurb anyway. But, I went around and kicked the tyres and had a look, and it actually looked in really good condition. Fast forward, setting aside the lockdown and whatever else, the challenges we've had during the summer with materials and window deliveries and whatever else, the back of the house nearly fell down once we started pulling bits and pieces apart. They had rogue builders in some time ago. Honestly, Raj, it was scary to think that people were living in that property in terms of lintels, plasterboard users, packers for structural lintels. Literally, the whole back of the house had fallen down. There was no bearing for any of the beams and what have you. So yeah, do you know what? We do come across them, and you've just got to take the emotion out of it. You've just got to take the emotion out of it, because you can sit there screaming, crying, kicking up and down. It's not going to solve anything. Of course, we all have that stubbing your toe moment, but it's like, right, okay, what do we do? What do we do? And again, it goes back to that robust supply chain that we touched on earlier in terms of the arm's length. It's just important, whether that's local or at arm's length. It's absolutely vital. I have an excellent project manager and contractor that I work with, and it's not the first problem we've come across. So we sat down. We discuss things regularly. So we sat down, we reviewed the budget, we found out where we were. We always build a bit of contingency into our development, so there is that money there. Although it always gets put in, and we won't spend that, but it always gets spent on something. Now, it's whether it's something fundamental like stopping the back of the property from falling down, or whether it's the bells and whistles that you like, at the back end, that you've managed to keep a bit of money in the pot. So literally, we sat there. It's an engineering solution at the end of the day, and no matter what happens, take the emotion out of it. Look for the best engineering solution. Does it meet building regs? Can we procure it in time? What's the cost of it? Talk to a structural engineer and just crack on and do it. Because the only other solution would be to sell out halfway through, and that is the absolute and utter worst time to sell a development. You won't get your value back. You won't get your money back, no matter how much of a. And if you've done your sums right in the first place, then you'll have that capacity within it to build. That's why when people go in doing developments with 10% profit in there, it's not for me. Again, it might suit their risk profile. It's just not for me. There has to be enough fat in there to cover the eventualities like this. So if you don't need it, then you've got a good result. If you do need it, then we didn't get away with it, because get away with it would seem to imply that it was luck. It's not luck, So you need to be going in, making sure there's plenty of meat on the bone in your developments. Unless money's an option for you, then it's well done.
No, Steve, I think that's great. And people will come across it, no matter how big or small the projects are. Those things tend to happen at the wrong time, but like you said, as quickly as possible, calm the emotions, because it's not helping anything. And it comes down to your power team and your team around you. Like you said, troubleshooting with your project manager there. And if you have to get someone else extra in, if you have to outsource and get someone else in, look at all your angles, because it's about how resourceful you get then. But you've got to talk it through and work through the problem as best you can.
Throughout my construction career and with investors as well now, I have never done a construction project or a development that didn't have, an issue of sorts. And I'm not just talking about, I can't get a bag of plaster or I'll drive to Poole. I'm talking about, a reasonably serious issue which could scare a lot of people away. And I used to say to my clients in construction, and I say to my investors now, I said, listen, that's why I'm here. If it was easy, you wouldn't need me. Yeah? If it was easy, you could just crack on and do it yourself, and we'd all be multi-billionaires with huge property portfolios, everywhere in the world, and no work could be done because we'd all be just spending our money. There are issues. I've been doing it for 30 years. I've been able to make a living out of it because these issues come up, and I'm used to solving them for people in the best way possible. Taking into account, the three cornerstones of development construction is time, quality, and cost. Taking those into account and deciding which of those is the most important to you. So if out of those the cost is the most important to you, then you can take your time over the solution, and you don't have to worry too much about the quality. If time and quality are the most important things to you, then you can throw money at it to solve the solution. So it's really about think about what's important to you on the project, take the emotion out of it, and seek advice as well. Seek advice from people, because there are not many problems or issues in property that someone else won't have come up with. Make use of online forums, of your power team. I just work with my contractor, with my project manager. Between us, we have enough experience to work through it, and it was just an engineering solution. We couldn't undo. Well, in fact we did undo the bad work that had been done before, but it had been done. It was there. It needed dealing with. If there is an issue as well, and I see this time and time again, don't bury your head in the sand. Don't pretend it's going to go away of its own volition. I mean, don't make everything an issue, but if there's a serious issue there, address it. Take advice. Seek help. Yeah.
And this is definitely one of those industries where people will help, in one way. There's enough people to talk to. There is someone out there who has dealt with this before. You just have to be resourceful enough to find them and reach out. Steve, we're coming towards the end of this sit down now. And I want to ask one last question in terms of going back to the lessons you wish you knew when you were starting out. I wonder if you've touched on it already, but I wonder if there's anything else you learnt this year of all years. You've been in the game a long time, but this year is, they don't happen. Well, happens every 100 years apparently, but it's not something that happens all the time. So I wonder if there's, even with your experience, something you picked up this year that you thought, right, I'm going to use that moving forward.
Okay, so I would firstly is to just try and get things in context and say, well, what effect has COVID actually had on my business? In a year's time, will it still have that effect? Now, if it's not COVID, it'll be something else. Every couple of years we come up. 9/11 is one that just immediately springs to mind. 9/11, it was like being in a Die Hard film. I had no idea what was going on. I was in Corfu at the time when it happened. I came back. It was just like the world was coming to an end. It really was. And that had a huge effect on the economy. The credit crunch, when that, again, you could not get credit for loving the money during the credit crunch. So I wouldn't focus too much on COVID itself. What I would say is pretty much this is like a multiplier of the last subject we touched on. It's a business challenge. What is the challenge? What effect does it actually have on your business? Now, part of our business, one of our businesses is student accommodation. Now, back in March, we were faced with a prospect that students may not be going to university in this academic year, 2020-21. And that would have been a pretty big one, and I'm not sure how we could hedge against that, in terms of planning it, for the business planning. You really have to take it out day by day. I mean, we did sensible things, looking at our income and outcome, looking at our expenses, tighten the belt a little bit. These, let's just put, because we're talking about business, let's just put the term recession, downturn, whatever you like, economic downturn. They will happen. I read on average the other day. I always refer to the Bible, 7 good years, 7 bad years. The economy is cyclical in nature. You know, I've always said 7 good years, 7 bad years. Something I've always said. I read the other day on average there was a property, what they call it, a property bust or downturn every 13 years. It fits in pretty much, you know, perfectly with that. I was expecting a downturn in 2021, so without being smug or in any way, shape or form or patronising, I had it in the back of my mind, 2021, there was going to be a downturn. So I've been making, since 2015, I've been making plans for the downturn. And that directly comes from a lesson that I learned for the credit crunch back in 2007, 2008, putting all my eggs in one basket. I had a very expensive property in southwest London, in Richmond. I mean, I think the stamp duty note was 6 figures. That'll give you an idea of how expensive it was. Interest rates were a lot higher than they are now. And I alluded to lying awake at night, worrying about stuff. That is the one that did keep me awake at night. You know, we were paying a lot out in the finance there. But I was, you know, I hadn't, when I say put all my eggs in one basket, I still was in a very good job at the time. So that enabled me to come through. I did not want to get myself in that position again. So unless the effects of COVID to the economy are worse than the credit crunch, which, you know, and longer lasting, then we're going to be okay. You know, we're going to be okay. So I would say it's learn by your mistakes is a big one in that. You know, it's don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't overstretch yourself. You know, just be sensible about things, because property is one of those things where people, you know, I know people who run businesses really, really well, completely unrelated to property, run them really well, run a really tight ship, know everything about everything, have worked hard, built up this brand, built up something, create wealth, and just throw it away in property. The guy I was talking about earlier with losing 6 figures, you seem to come to property and think, well, I'll spend it and I can't lose money. I mean, come on, people, let's just be sensible about this, yeah? So keep your wits about you. Understand what your risk profile is as well. You know, some people are willing to, I was going to use the word gamble there, and I think some people do literally gamble. They, you know, it's like buying a lottery ticket. They do more research on TripAdvisor for their summer holiday than they do on buying their first property. Honestly, Raj, you've seen it as well, and that's why you're laughing.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably was me, to be honest.
Wow, I did it, and I've admitted to it.
Yeah. No, that's it. Like I said, the emotion gets the better of you initially, and you know, I said it before, and you don't know what you don't know, and that sometimes means you don't know where to look for the research, and that's part of the reason we do episodes like this. So it gives people an idea, a bit of food for thought, as to, okay, I should, before I do this deal or before I get into that, I need to at least consider these options, and then you make a decision with a bit more informed information then.
Now, whether it's property or whether it's anything else, my last of my top 10, top 20 I'll share today is don't invest in anything you don't understand. If you don't understand how it works, you've got no measure to see whether it's going wrong or not. You know, you need to fundamentally understand, and also you need to decide day one, what does good look like in terms of that. So does good look like 5% yield, 5% capital growth? Does it look like 10% yield, 1% capital growth? You know, you need to make something, because then you've got something to measure against, because you need to know in a year's time, 2 years, 3 years' time, can you make your money work harder than it is currently? You know, people will refurbish properties, build them. They look fantastic, beautiful looking properties. You know, tenants in there, full occupancy. Well, of course, the tenants could never afford to do that. You spent too much money on it. You've made it like a 5-star hotel and they're paying £500 rent a month. Of course, you've got 100% occupancy. How much did you want to make out of it again? So it's just it's not easy, but it is simple, you know? So it can be as complicated as you want to make it. I just like to make things as simple for myself as I can. A to B in a straight line. You know, black and white, yes or no. Now, not everything fits into those boxes, but that's how I try to approach my investment.
No, Steve, I absolutely appreciate that. And it's funny you say about what does good look like to you. And I'll just say a quick example for me the other day. Someone told me about HMO they were looking at, and the agent said they had great yields. Back to the agents that were working for the vendor. The thing about HMOs and yields is, like a business, it's turnover. right? Especially if you're covering bills and especially with the maintenance costs and things like that. So those yields really drop quite quickly when it comes to return on investment. And yield might not be the best metric. Going back to what you said, what does good look like? What is the metric that you're working on? Might not be. It might be good enough just to go, okay, this is worth looking at. What does the yield look like? But then really dive into the figures. And is that the metric you're really going to be working on at the end for you? That's something for people to consider. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, yeah. Return on cash employed, I think, is a much better measure for me in terms of looking at it. I don't really take yield into consideration. Also, I mean, time and time again, I do get offered HMOs with genuinely decent upfront yields, but they need a full refurbish. So you've got to factor that in as well, and that could, by the time you've got a deposit and your stamp duty and your fees, the refurbishment can easily equal that, if not be more than all of that. So all of a sudden you've doubled your cash invested. So your return has been halved, For those of you at CSE statistics like I have, fairly straightforward. So look at it in the whole. Yeah, look at it. Life cycle costing was a big thing. Is a big thing in construction. You're going to earn this. You're going to own this for quite a long time. So you got to be thinking about it, and also be prepared. Is if you do go in and do your refurb, it's going to need another one in 10 years' time, maybe. Especially on HMOs, especially got a high turnover of occupancy. So, and each property strategy will have its own particulars that you need to take into consideration. But I think if people look at return on cash employed, first off, then that'll be a good starter. It's got to be tied in, obviously, with the risk profile. And your exit strategies and power team and everything else we spoke about today. So perhaps we could have another catch up at some point if people are interested and carry on the conversation.
These are the conversations, these are the lessons that people need to refer back to. And it's one thing to listen to us now, as we said at the very start, when you relax, when you're having a cup of coffee, when you're going for a walk, and you're unemotional about these decisions. I urge people to listen to this episode again when you're going through the motions, when you're going through that project or about to buy something. These are timeless, these lessons, a lot of them here. Do refer back to it, because you never know when it might provide clarity at the right time for you. Steve, I really appreciate you coming on with us today. If people want to find you, Steve, learn more about you, where can they get hold of you?
I mentioned that I haven't come here to sell a course or anything today. I've literally come here to have a chat with a friend about properly trying to help people. If there is anything I've said that's of interest, I'm always happy to have a chat with people. Steve at steverice.co.uk. Drop me an email. That's Steve, STEVE, at steverice, all one word, .co.uk. Drop me a line, say hi. You want to chat, you want to ask a specific question about anything we've covered today, please do. Just remember, I did say I only work with people who I like, so make sure you tick that box. No, I'm only joking. Feel free to drop me a line, and as and when I can, I'll get back to you.
Steve, that's absolutely brilliant. Thanks again for coming on, and we'll catch up again soon.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Raj.